Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We're really excited about today's topic. We're going to be taking a deep dive into something that might sound really simple on the surface, but it's got some really powerful implications, especially in today's rapidly changing work landscape with, AI coming into the picture more and more.
It is super interesting, and you're right. A lot of times the most powerful stuff is the stuff that on the surface seems kind of basic or obvious.
Yeah, and we're going to be looking at a few different videos today that really unpack this idea of making progress through these small, incremental changes. It's called Kaizen, combined with this really crucial practice of reflection and um, feedback to make sure you're actually moving in the right direction.
Those feedback loops are super important, and I think what's interesting is how much that applies not just to human teams and the work that we do, but also how we're going to be needing to think about that with AI and how it learns.
Absolutely. And our goal today is to kind of distill these videos down to some really clear takeaways that you can actually put into practice right away, so you can start making progress without feeling completely overwhelmed by the scale of change that's happening all around us.
I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, that feeling of things are moving so fast. How do we even begin to keep up?
Right. So let's start with understanding what exactly is Kaizen.
Sure.
One of the videos defines it as continuous improvement through these small, deliberate steps.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to contrast that with all the talk we hear about bold innovation and these disruptive overnight changes,
Yeah.
sometimes called kaikaku, that often gets so much attention.
Yeah, and Kaikaku definitely has its place. Sometimes you do need to make these big, sweeping changes, but it's inherently riskier, right?
Yeah.
You're putting all
Yeah.
your eggs in one basket. Kaizen, I think, offers a more adaptable and less kind of high pressure way to evolve over time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more about building that sustainable momentum.
Hmm.
So the video, it really highlights how Kaizen can be used in all sorts of situations, like helping teams that feel stuck, making those complex changes like integrating AI feel more, I guess, approachable and less daunting. It also talks about how it helps build a culture where people feel comfortable experimenting and actually learning from their mistakes, which I think is so important.
Oh, absolutely. That learning piece is crucial, and that element of trust.
Yeah.
When the changes are small and incremental, people are more likely to try new things because they're not so afraid of completely failing.
Totally. And I love how, to really bring this to life, the presentation, it actually shares this great story about starting a YouTube channel with absolutely no experience.
Oh, cool.
And they admit the early videos were pretty rough.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Right. But what I thought was so valuable is that they actually kept those early videos public to share how much improvement happened over time, you know, just by consistently putting in the work and making those small changes along the way.
It's powerful because it's real,
Yeah.
right? Like everyone starts somewhere, and you don't have to be perfect from day one.
Exactly. And it made me think of that idea of putting aside a little bit of money regularly. It might not seem like much at first, but over time it adds up.
Oh, that's a great analogy. You're not, trying to make $1 million overnight. You're just consistently building that financial security over time.
Exactly. And there are so many benefits to this approach of taking those smaller steps. The video points out that it gives you the space to learn and think without feeling completely overwhelmed. And plus, if you make a mistake, which you will, everyone does, the impact is usually pretty small.
You have that room to experiment and course correct without, derailing the whole project.
Totally. And they even talk about this one experiment with a green screen that didn't quite work as planned, but instead of getting discouraged, they just learned from it and shifted their focus to other areas where they could make improvements.
I love that. It's about embracing those little failures as learning opportunities.
Exactly. And that's that flexibility that Kaizen really offers. And it's the accumulation of all these little changes, over time that really leads to those big results.
Yeah, it's the compound effect, right?
Yeah.
Small, consistent actions adding up to something much greater.
The presentation contrasts Kaizen, this idea of small gradual improvements building on what you already have, with Kaikaku, which is more about that big polished, launch from day one. And neither is inherently better. It really just depends on the situation and what you're trying to achieve.
Right. Sometimes you need that big bang approach, but a lot of times that slow and steady wins the race.
Totally. And the video, it also mentions how Kaizen kind of relates to agile culture, values, principles, practices, processes, tools, for doing complex work, and waterfall for like more well-defined projects.
And how it tends to align more with agile culture, values, principles, practices, processes, tools.
Yeah, because it's more iterative.
Right. With agile culture, values, principles, practices, processes, tools, you're constantly like iterating, getting feedback, making adjustments. And that really resonates with the whole philosophy of Kaizen.
Absolutely. Now, there are definitely times when a bigger, more like disruptive change like Kaikaku might be necessary. Maybe if you're facing some big market shifts, you need to pivot quickly, or if there are like regulatory requirements that you have to meet. But as the video points out, that approach, it comes with higher risk because you really need to have a solid plan in place from the get-go.
You don't have that same margin for error.
Right. But Kaizen, it's like it's easier to integrate into your existing workflows. There's less risk, there's a longer time frame to work with, which can actually reduce pressure, and it's easier to like correct mistakes along the way. It's about building that habit of continuous improvement into, your daily work without having to like launch this massive initiative.
Yeah, it becomes more of a way of life than this big, scary event.
And there was this great analogy that I really liked in the video about launching a rocket.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So with Kaizen, like getting the direction right is key, while speed is less critical. You just need to keep taking those consistent small steps. Kaikaku, on the other hand, is more like that sudden, bold, disruptive shift, often driven from the top down. Like
Yeah.
it's used for like completely overhauling systems.
It's like the difference between a marathon and a sprint.
Yeah.
Right? You need a different approach, different mindset, different training.
Exactly. And a video, it emphasizes that Kaizen can be used for really any kind of work, whether it's simple, complicated, or complex, although it does say, in those really chaotic situations where you need to like react quickly, you might need a more immediate response.
Right. Sometimes you just got to put out the fire, but then once the dust settles, you can start applying that Kaizen mindset to prevent future fires, so to speak.
Right. It's about those long-term sustainable improvements. And we talked about how Kaikaku, it tends to align more with that waterfall approach of upfront project planning.
Right, where you have that whole project plan laid out in advance.
The video also talks about like the psychological benefits of these small incremental changes. Like you have more opportunities to, explore different options and kind of build your confidence step by step. It also stresses the importance of creating a psychologically safe environment where, mistakes are seen as chances to learn.
Absolutely. People need to feel like it's okay to experiment, to make those small mistakes without fear of like being punished or ridiculed.
Right. That's such a crucial element of a healthy learning culture.
Yeah.
And they introduced this really interesting concept called the embarrassment principle.
Okay. I've never heard of that.
It's about choosing your next Kaizen improvement based on picking something that's so small and easy that it would be almost embarrassing not to do it.
Oh, I like that.
Something that can easily fit into your busy schedule. Like they gave the example of adding text to YouTube screens. Like it's a tiny thing, but it's an improvement.
Yeah, it's about lowering that barrier to entry and just getting started.
Right. And
Yeah.
and the video talks about like how you get this little dopamine hit from completing those small achievable goals. And that can really build momentum. It's almost like, solving a puzzle where each small step contributes to the bigger picture. And I think that can be so much more motivating and rewarding than, that high pressure environment that Kaikaku sometimes creates.
It's about fostering that intrinsic motivation where people are excited to come to work and contribute because they feel like they're making a difference, even in small ways.
Absolutely. The video also touches on like building habits of discipline and resilience through, continuous change. And one really important point was about avoiding perfectionism with Kaizen. It's so easy to get bogged down in trying to make every little thing perfect, but the key is to just focus on getting it done and knowing you can always refine it later.
You don't want to let that pursuit of perfection become the enemy of progress.
Exactly. It's more important to make progress than it is to be perfect right away. And interestingly, Kaizen can actually increase predictability in terms of a team's ability to like keep moving forward. Even if the exact timeline is less certain, it's a way to get teams that feel kind of unstuck by breaking those big changes into smaller, more manageable chunks. And I think that fosters this sense of ownership, autonomy, and pride in the work.
You're empowering people to take control of their own improvement journey.
Absolutely. And the presentation, it really advocates for a learning culture that values experimentation over like strict rules. And it sees failure as a valuable way to learn. Real-time feedback becomes super important for, making sure you're on the right track. And it fosters growth at the individual level, at the team level, even at the business level through this like ongoing cycle of improvement.
It's amazing how those small incremental changes can ripple outwards and have this really profound impact.
And for those of you who are, working in agile culture, values, principles, practices, processes, tools, environments where there are like inherent unknowns and a lot of uncertainty, Kaizen can be super helpful. It can make those unknowns feel less intimidating. It's about shifting the focus from when do we need to make a big change
Mm.
to what small change are we making today?
It's about being proactive and embracing change as a constant rather than something to be feared.
And their advice is to like start with those really easy steps, just to remove any friction and avoid getting stuck.
Sometimes the smallest changes can have the biggest impact.
Exactly. And they talk about how repetition is key for building habits and consistently delivering those improvements. And I think a really important point is that they emphasize building a culture of documenting these changes, to track your progress over time.
Yeah, it's easy to lose sight of how far you've come when you're focused on those small incremental steps.
Right. And that's different from Kaikaku, which relies on that initial big plan.
With Kaizen, it's more about, evolving that plan as you go based on what you're learning along the way.
Exactly. And from an economic standpoint, Kaizen offers benefits like, seeing the results of your improvements more quickly. It has the potential for like initiatives to become self-funding, less waste, overall cost reduction. It's also presented as a smart way to manage risk when you're implementing things like AI because it allows for testing and adaptation in the real world.
Especially with AI, where things are moving so fast, that ability to adapt and course correct is crucial.
Absolutely. And the importance of feedback and transparency, especially with AI, is really emphasized, to
Mhm.
make sure that the development process is responsible and safe. And finally, celebrating those small wins is so important for team morale and, just reinforcing that discipline of continuous improvement. The takeaway message is that continuous improvement is an ongoing journey, not a final destination. And that even those really big transformations, they can be achieved with this Kaizen approach if you give it enough time and focus on those small, consistent steps, ultimately leading to better outcomes for everyone involved.
It's about shifting your mindset from achieving some sort of end state to embracing this constant evolution and improvement as the new normal.
So now let's turn our attention to the crucial role of reflection. We've looked at a few videos that really dive into why teams get stuck even when they're, following processes. And one key reason that comes up again and again is this lack of genuine reflection, especially in those dreaded retrospectives that everyone loves to hate.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have had the experience of being in retrospectives that feel like a waste of time, right? They're just going through the motions without any real substance or change coming out of them.
Exactly. It's like retrospective theater, And the 12th Agile Culture Values Principles Practices Processes Tools principle, it actually emphasizes this importance of regular reflection to become more effective and, adapt your behavior. But these videos, they stress that real reflection, it can be uncomfortable. It requires being mindful and creating a psychologically safe space where people feel comfortable talking about what didn't go well without, fear of blame. It really is more about the culture than just the process.
Yeah, sometimes those tough conversations are the ones that lead to the most growth.
Totally. And they talk about how reflection is like this mechanism that turns experience into insight and then turns that insight into adaptation. And that's crucial for building a learning culture and achieving continuous growth.
It's about taking that step back and saying, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and what can we do differently next time?
Exactly. It's like approaching your work as a scientific experiment, Plan, do, check, adjust. And teams that skip reflection or aren't really engaged in it, they end up stuck in that plan do loop and they miss those crucial opportunities to adjust and actually improve. They're basically just on autopilot, even if they're going in the wrong direction.
Without that check and adjust phase, you're just repeating patterns, not actually evolving and getting better.
And these videos, they provide some really great examples of how genuine reflection can lead to really significant improvements. Like one example was a tech team that boosted their efficiency and morale just by identifying a key bottleneck through like honest reflection during their
It's
retrospectives.
amazing how sometimes just identifying the problem is half the battle.
Right. And another example was how blameless postmortems actually transformed these painful releases into valuable learning experiences.
Yeah, taking the blame out of the equation allows for more honest and productive reflection.
Totally. And they point out some red flags that can indicate that a team isn't really progressing, like hearing things like, that's just how we do things, or we've always done it that way.
Those are classic signs of stagnation.
And that can be really dangerous in these complex environments, especially with AI becoming more and more prevalent. Because as one of the videos highlights, AI learns and adapts so quickly, and and human teams need to be able to do the same to keep pace. And this isn't just about having the right tools or processes, it's about building a culture that actively embraces learning.
It's about creating an environment where people are encouraged to experiment, to be curious, to ask questions, and to constantly be learning and growing.
And leadership plays a huge role here. They need to create the space and provide the support for teams to actually act on what they learn. It's about offering context, not control, and asking good, thought-provoking questions.
Leaders need to be more like facilitators or coaches than dictators. They need to empower their teams to take ownership of their own learning and improvement.
Absolutely. And psychological safety comes up again as being super essential. It's what allows for open communication, for people to disagree respectfully, and to challenge assumptions. And all of those things are crucial for learning, innovation, and growth. And while AI can automate repeatable tasks, it's those real, honest retrospectives that improve the people on the team, not just the processes, which is what ultimately fosters that mindset of continuous improvement.
It's about nurturing that uniquely human capacity for adaptation and learning.
And one of the videos shares 5 proven ways to make retrospectives more effective.
Oh, I'm all ears.
So the first one is, establishing that foundation of psychological safety where people feel comfortable giving honest feedback. And that really relies on leaders being authentic, owning their mistakes, actively inviting feedback, and rewarding honesty.
It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to speak their minds without fear of retribution.
Exactly. The second strategy is to focus on generating actionable insights by asking questions that encourage learning, rather than letting this session turn into a complaint fest, and by reframing problems as experiments.
It's about shifting the focus from blame to understanding and learning.
The third is to be selective. Focus on just 1 or 2 key changes to make sure they actually get implemented instead of creating this long list of things that never get done.
It's about prioritizing and focusing on the things that will have the biggest impact.
And the fourth is to regularly change up the format of your retrospectives to avoid them becoming stale and to help surface different kinds of insights.
It's about keeping things fresh and engaging.
And the fifth, which they really emphasize, is the importance of follow-through. You need to start each subsequent retrospective by checking in on the actions from the previous one to demonstrate that reflection actually leads to tangible change.
It's about closing that feedback loop and making sure that reflection actually leads to action.
And they touch on reflection in Kanban, where feedback is integrated directly into the workflow through various regular meetings. And that promotes continuous improvement as an ongoing activity rather than just something that happens at the end of an iteration.
It's about making reflection a part of the everyday work, not just an afterthought.
And the videos also emphasize how crucial retrospectives are in the context of AI work. To proactively identify ethical and safety concerns, question the impact on customers, and spot those unintended consequences early on.
Especially with AI, where things can go wrong in ways that we might not even anticipate, that kind of ongoing reflection and ethical consideration is paramount.
Absolutely. And the key takeaway is that retrospectives should be safe, intentional, and focused conversations that actually lead to concrete actions, not just a performance for show or a simple status update.
They should be a valuable investment of time that leads to real, tangible improvements.
Now, finally, let's talk about feedback specifically for AI systems. One of the videos points out that even with rigorous testing, AI failures can be unpredictable. So continuous learning through robust feedback systems is absolutely essential. And building those feedback mechanisms from the very beginning is crucial.
Especially when you consider the potential consequences of AI going wrong.
Mm.
Those feedback loops are essential for ensuring that AI stays aligned with our values and doesn't cause harm.
Right. And that 12th Agile culture, values, principles, practices, processes, tools principle applied to AI systems means that feedback loop needs to start as soon as the AI is deployed.
So not just during development, but in the real world.
Right. AI retrospectives, they need to specifically address ethical concerns, identify potential bias in the system, and consider any unintended consequences. And this requires involving a diverse range of voices, including, ethics advisors and community representatives. And those deeper reflection questions like who might be harmed by this and what assumptions are built into the system are so important.
Bringing in those different perspectives is so important for catching those blind spots and making sure that we're considering all the potential implications.
Totally. And monitoring how AI behaves after it's been deployed is critical because of its adaptability and potential to kind of drift over time. And we also need to balance the need for data to improve the AI with, respecting user consent and privacy.
Yeah, that's a tricky balance to strike, but it's crucial.
It is. And the video gives some examples of user-friendly feedback mechanisms.
Yeah.
Things like clear feedback channels, random sampling of AI outputs, aggregated and anonymized data, and user feedback communities.
It's about making it easy for users to provide feedback and then actually using that feedback to improve the system.
Exactly. And they point out that AI agents, they often have high failure rates in complex tasks. And that really highlights the need for this continuous feedback, this ongoing learning. It acts as a safeguard. It helps surface issues early on and keeps the AI aligned with our goals. And their recommendation is to start small with well-defined problems and simple feedback methods, and then refine your approach as you scale up.
It's about taking that iterative approach,
Yeah.
just like we talked about with Kaizen.
And they conclude by suggesting that the future leaders in the field of AI are going to be defined by their ability to learn quickly and effectively deliver on user needs, adapting rapidly and staying true to their values.
It's about being agile, both in terms of the technology and the mindset.
So let's wrap this up by quickly recapping those core ideas. We've explored this powerful combination of Kaizen's small, consistent improvements and the absolutely essential role of regular, honest reflection and feedback. And that's not just for us humans working in teams, but also for the AI systems that we're building and using.
These principles provide a really powerful framework for achieving continuous growth and adaptation in a world that's constantly changing.
And the key takeaway for you, the listener, is that you can apply these principles right now. Even those big, seemingly insurmountable challenges, they can be broken down into small, manageable steps. And a commitment to learning and adapting, that's something anyone can cultivate.
It's about starting small, being consistent, and always seeking to learn and improve.
So here's something to think about. How could you integrate just one small Kaizen-inspired improvement into your work today? Or take a few minutes to really reflect on a recent project? What's one tiny step you could take right now?
Remember, even the smallest action can be the starting point for significant progress.
And we encourage you to click on the thumbnails or links in the description to explore those source video presentations in more depth. You can learn more about how Kaizen supports agile culture, values, principles, practices, processes, tools, how to integrate AI more safely, and the power of that plan, do, check, act, cycle, and feedback. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.